Aloha kako, mahalo to each and every one of you for joining us tonight as we kick off the start of MUA Hawai'i, a community dialogue series. I'm Kathy and I will be serving as the moderator tonight. The topic of the week is managing Hawaii's role in the global visitor and destination industry. Thank you to our panelists and our guests for participating tonight in our interactive series. For those who are just tuning in, I also want to let you know that this session will be recorded and uploaded on our website at ikaikaanderson.com. To our guests, please feel free to message us any questions you may have for the panelists, as we will be addressing them during the Q&A function at the end. Now, I would like to introduce our panelists at this time. Ikaika Anderson, father, caregiver, and public servant who has dedicated over 2 decades of his professional career working for the people of Hawaii. He is a former city council chair and presently a candidate for lieutenant governor. Thank you, Ikaika, for being with us tonight.
Aloha.
Next, Kumu Hinaleimoana Wong-Kalu, community advocate, Native Hawaiian teacher, cultural practitioner, and a community leader. She is here tonight to share her manao as a Native Hawaiian and her perspective on how we can work together to improve the visitor industry for Hawaii. She currently serves as an honorary co-chair for Ikaika Anderson for Lieutenant Governor campaign. Mahalo, Kumu.
Mahalo. Mahalo nui. Aloha.
Next, we are so honored to have Jerry Gibson. Jerry is the vice president for BRE Hotels and Resorts and previously was the vice president of Turtle Bay Resort. With over 44 years of hospitality experience in Hawaii, he lends his time, talent, and expertise to a dozen industry and community boards, including vice chair of the Honolulu Police Commission. Gibson is well known as an advocate and spokesman for the tourism industry and was most recently announced as the first chairman of the Hawaii Hotel Alliance. Thank you, Jerry.
Aloha, everyone.
Last, we have Taylor Kellerman. Born and raised on the windward side of Oahu, Taylor received a Bachelor's of Science in Tropical Agriculture from the University of Hawaii at Hilo. Taylor is now the Director of Diversified Agriculture and Land Stewardship for Kualoa Ranch, with responsibilities including livestock, aquaculture, farming, and conservation. He has served as an officer for the Hawaii Crop Improvement Association and on the boards of West Oahu Soil and Water Conservation District and Kunia Water Commission. Thank you, Taylor. All right, so I would like to begin with our panelist questions. We are kicking off MUA Hawai'i tonight with our first topic, which is managing Hawaii's role in the global visitor and destination industry. And to our panelists, during COVID-19, we saw a shift in Hawaii's tourism and visitor industry. Can you share your insights on what took place and the biggest lesson you learned? I would like to offer each panelist 2 minutes to address this question, and I would like to begin with Jerry Gibson. Jerry?
Thank you very much, Kathy. Appreciate it. And aloha, everyone. It seems like looking back a couple of years ago now, quickly we saw, hotels and attractions either fully stop functioning or constricting quickly. And then the waterfall effect of not only the hotels and the attractions and some of the major businesses, but we saw independent restaurants start closing. We have lost a lot of restaurants in the last couple of years, and I'm sure all of you listening tonight realize that. Beach activities, Kualoa Ranch closed for a while. Polynesian Cultural Center closed for a long time. Constriction of the airlines as well, a lot less seats coming in, and certainly international travel we haven't seen for a very long time. So a tough go ahead for us at that point. Some of the new things we saw was we started sanitizing everything and everything from and wearing masks and having all kinds of new hotel protocols and rent-a-car protocols, et cetera, et cetera. The government steps in and starts to help, which was very, very helpful. That was a big deal for us here in Hawaii. Hotels, churches, businesses, everybody that could, got all together and started some food drives, and a very big deal, helped a lot of families. Green shoots started to come out of the real tough times. People started going back to the beach again, more family time for sure, lots of time to think, lots of time to contemplate about the past. And we really were, in Hawaii, all in the same canoe. A lot of lessons learned during this time, and we've had a couple of years to learn them, and we're still learning. For sure, communication, learn from the past. We've talked about, boy, I've been here, God, almost 40 years now. We've been talking about diversity in the islands, with different businesses and that kind of thing. And, over that period of time, we haven't done much, but I think we need to really, really take a look at diversity and see where we want to go. Protocols, in place for, different attractions that we have. Look at Hanauma Bay now. I think that's a pretty good example of, beginning to take care of our treasures. Start looking at trails, start looking at beaches and many of the other wonderful things that we have here, and taking much better care of them. Buy local. We've been really working with the hotels the last couple of years to do so. In fact, we have one hotel in our group that buys $5 million a year at this point in fruits, vegetables, beef, all the things that we want to do, that is the right thing to do here. And I think that all the hotels need to climb on board that and see if we can do a much better job than we have in the past. Mentor our young, mentor our managers, get our residents involved with managing hotels and mentor them to the point where they feel comfortable in doing so. And we can do a lot more than that. In fact, I will tell you, in the 80s, we did a pretty good job of it. And then we somehow, went by the wayside over, 20 years ago, it seems now, and we haven't done a good job with that, but we can do a lot more work with that. So I think those are a few of the lessons, and I'll turn it over to someone else.
Mahalo, Jerry. Thank you for your answer. I would like to pass the mic to Kumu Hinaleimoana Wong. During COVID-19, we saw a shift in Hawaii's tourism and visitor industry. Can you share your insights on what took place and the biggest lesson you personally learned?
Mahalo. The insights and the lessons that we have learned during COVID-19 include the following: the fragility of Hawaii and our dependency upon the continental US for everything that we have, including our lifeline, and one of the major lifelines has been tourism. Therefore, we saw also that in trying to recover from the time of COVID-19, it's exceedingly challenging to observe, for example, COVID-19 etiquette and requirements so that we have a safe society, but also to acknowledge the kinds of needs that tourism has. So what does this tell us? It tells us that if we consider three terms, the kinds of relationships that we have: parasitic relationship, where one body relies upon another, often to the detriment of a host body, and it's a no-win situation really, because those who are dependent on others and then and the others kind of fade off, they'll eventually run out of something to depend upon. A codependent relationship where neither are really going to be able to stand without each other, and both like being dependent on substance, for example, both stand to fail. But a truly symbiotic relationship, which I think we would best to think about, is one where we have different elements thriving in our community that can complement each other, but do not put each other at risk if one falls or the other. And what does that mean for Hawaii? We have to be very proactive in thinking about how do we become more self-sustaining? How do we empower tourism to do that? How do we empower tourism to fuel our economy to the degree where homegrown by and for Hawaii can sustain Hawaii and become a better possible export out to the world, rather than having the kind of tourism that is going to take away from the quality of life of our island people, of Kanaka and other Kama'aina as well. We have to explore possibilities that truly Hawaii needs a different kind of tourism that does not create a parasitic or a codependency type of relationship. And with that, I'll leave my answer very short and sweet. And back to you. Mahalo.
Mahalo, Hina. That was a great answer. I would like to turn the floor over to Taylor Kellerman to answer this question for us. And again, to reiterate, we saw a shift in Hawaii's tourism and visitor industry during COVID-19. Can you please share your insights on what took place and the biggest lesson you learned?
Aloha, everyone. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak with you guys tonight. I was thinking about the question earlier, and I think I can summarize it in really kind of the terminology of increased awareness. I think that the shift in normalcy when visitors basically stopped, and as Jerry mentioned, when restaurants started closing and basically everybody had to look introspectively, created a situation where people were able to kind of view what was important to them, and things like, I think our local residents buy in on the importance for self-sustainability and resiliency. I think residents' desire for a visitor industry that's maybe less extractive, kind of like Kumu was mentioning. I think also, the desire for general diversity and how we look at ourselves economically as a state. I think that when you look at what this opportunity afforded us, even though it was something that came with a lot of hurt, it was a good friend of mine, Peter Merriman, he mentioned something in a panel I was in with him once. He said, never let a good crisis go to waste. And I think that that disruption that we experienced has allowed us to kind of look introspectively at what is important to us. I know me personally, at our business at Kualoa, we were able to kind of utilize that to increase awareness around things like our conservation management and agriculture that we do, where the big joke in my circle of friends was always that, we were only known for movies and ATVs. But with this shift, we were able to kind of capitalize on other resources that I think were lesser known. And hopefully what we were able to do is create a little bit of an example of what could be a possible sustainable land management for the future. I think really, we've experienced the biggest disruption we've seen in generations. And I think the main lesson I took away from it is how to capture that desire for positive change and how to maintain that, that direction that we've been able to kind of identify. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Taylor. Thank you for your answer. Ikaika, we would like you to perhaps say a few words from your perspective as someone who was in leadership and served at the City Council during the brink of COVID-19. We saw a shift in the tourism and visitor industry. Can you share your insights on what took place and the biggest lesson you learned?
Aloha, mahalo everyone for your participation this evening. Greatly appreciate this opportunity to share and for everyone to come together and talk story and offer manao. The key players that I've seen as a policymaker in the tourism industry are the community, the policymakers, and the industry itself. During the pandemic, residents saw a return to the Hawaii of old. And from what I've heard from many across Hawaii as I've gone through my travels across the state, is that residents started to feel like they gained some of their special places back, that those areas that residents hold near and dear became less crowded. And as a policymaker, I got to see that, I got to hear that from my community, and as a resident, my family, and for me, got to see that personally and experience it. Last year, 10 years ago, the Honolulu City Council implemented a policy initiative, and we removed commercial activities that largely catered to visitors to Hawaii from Windward Oahu parks and beaches. And last year, the Maui County Council implemented a building permit moratorium across the county's resort areas. And as I've traveled through the state, I hear from different communities, from Kauai, of course in Maui, as that's where that initiative was introduced at the council level, but even on Hawaii Island, communities are interested in the same types of policy initiatives. And I think we'll start to see more of that if those three stakeholders, community, policymakers, and industry, don't come together and have a real discussion as to how we're going to manage the industry and keep Hawaii's uniqueness. Not to say to our visitors into the industry, don't come. We certainly don't want to do that. But what we do need to do is have the same discussion that the Honolulu City Council did with many across Windward Oahu 10 years ago, and share ideas with the industry as to how and where visitors will visit. That's really what we found worked. And as I've had these discussions again across the state, people are extremely interested in these planning initiatives and coming forward with these different policy ideas. And as again, we've already seen with the Maui County Council, if the three stakeholders don't come together and don't do it soon, I think we'll have a lot of community unrest, very similar to what occurred in Windward Oahu back in 2011 and 2012. But I think this is manageable. It's certainly manageable if we bring people together. And the discussion that we're having tonight is what can be done when you bring different people from across the spectrum to get together and willing to talk story and share ideas.
Mahalo for that. I want to piggyback off of one of the comments you made with our second question, and I will open up the floor to all the panelists. So feel free to chime in if you'd like to answer this question. How does the community, the industry, and policymakers work together to maintain the uniqueness of Hawaii and keep it special?
Kathy, could you repeat that question, please?
Yes. How does the community, the industry, and policymakers work together to maintain the uniqueness of Hawaii and keep it special?
It's imperative that, first of all, that we have the discussion. And when we started this discussion in Windward Oahu, really what we were able to do is bring those different stakeholders together to talk about policy, but we were also able to bring in the largest landowner in Windward Oahu at that time, who had a lot of commercially zoned lands adjacent to city beach parks as well as city parks. So by right, that landowner would be able to continue with their commercial activities. But with community and with government, and even with some, I'll say suggestion, because it really wasn't pressure, it was more suggestion from even the industry and from government, our largest private landowner saw that they had an interest in this too, and helping to preserve Hawaii. And so what we did in Windward Oahu is we relegated all of the large scale commercial tour operators to simply come into Kailua town, keep the centralized drop-off spot there. And then from there, people ventured out to our parks and to our beaches and to our other businesses, either on foot, by renting bicycles, or even sometimes by bringing in their own rental cars. But what that did is it kept the larger parking areas free from, of course, from the tour buses, as well as from all of the kayak rentals, the kiteboard rentals, and the stand-up paddleboard rentals. And it allowed for a lot of breathing room, if you will, and for the community to be able to get some sense of what not only belongs to them, but what they pay for, their tax dollars go to pay for, back for them to enjoy. I did have that conversation with other Honolulu City Council members at the time to gauge interest in other areas on Oahu, to see if this was something that other colleagues of mine wanted to do. At that point in time, there was no interest. So I simply asked my colleagues to support Windward Oahu in what we were doing, and they did. And we started that in Kailua, that moved into Waimanalo. Now recently, you've seen these efforts also get discussed in West Oahu and into the North Shore, with some success, particularly on the North Shore. So I think that's exactly what happens when you bring all of the stakeholders together, is you come forth with policy that is discussed by the community, that is also ultimately supported by the community to make it workable and to make it agreeable for everyone.
Mahalo, Ikaika. Jerry, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think that was a great answer. And I think it all starts, as Ikaika was saying, with the communication, and then going back forensically and looking and saying, what are still the real problems that we haven't solved? And I think one of the big challenges that we have right now is the illegal short-term rental challenge. And we have something like 820 illegal short-term rentals and something like 12,000 on Oahu. So that's a big number. In 2019, if we look at 2019 as a base year, we brought in 10.4 million tourists. In the hotels, there was about 7.1 million tourists. So other was 3.3, and that was in the short-term rentals. And that was certainly distributed throughout the state, not just on Oahu. But think about those 3.3, over half of them were illegal if you do the math. So many of all four islands are working on this challenge. I really believe that there is some good legislation that will help to fix this, but it takes all hands on deck to look at a challenge like this. And there is others that we need to identify together, communicate, and work with all the groups to try and solve them. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, Jerry. I want to go into our next question, and this is for Taylor Kellerman. You know, one of the biggest things we're hearing about is the Hawaii Tourism Authority shifting focus to a new type of visitor and aiming to educate responsible visitors. This often relates back to the environmental impact that visitors have on our island home. As someone who has worked closely in conservation efforts, Taylor, can you please share your thoughts with us?
Absolutely. You know, I was listening to both the answers that Jerry and Ikaika gave earlier to that previous question, and I think it was addressing kind of the infrastructure portion of say, tensions that build when there are quote unquote shared resources between visitors and residents. And I think that often tends to create those dynamics that unhappiness tends to follow due to obvious reasons. But I think, you know, there's an auxiliary point to that, which is basically the type of visitor that we're attracting, and a type of visitor that I'd like to kind of speak to more so, which is the one that we're trying to create. Because I think that oftentimes you have those situations where people come to Hawaii because they know that we're beautiful, they know we have beauty, they know we have history. They know that we have beaches and all of those nice things that they get good Instagram pictures from. However, it is, again, kind of, I mentioned earlier, an extractive relationship in the sense of when you can find a visitor, either attract them in that type of demographic or category, or basically create while they're here, the ability to provide an experience as well as education that allows them to see Hawaii how we see it as residents, as basically a very special place, a place that is unique and a place that is our home, right? Because they're visiting our home. And I think that when you're able to create experiences where that is something that's a takeaway, and that's something that is really kind of emblazoned in their mind and soul, that's really where I think we can create that whole travel pono initiative that we hear people talk about. Because when I hear that whole term travel pono, I realize, you know, there's a lot of iterations that you can take from that. But I think really what it comes down to is, you know, are we creating somebody who is going to look at Hawaii and its resources and its people and its culture like we do, you know? And so there are opportunities, and there has been a lot of talk with HTA and Tourism Authority and different hotel chains of, you know, is there a way to incentivize certain travel groups in order to kind of push them towards different tours, different experiences, different opportunities where they're able to experience everything that we find so special. And so when you were mentioning kind of from that conservation natural resource perspective, there's different tours throughout the island. The one we have is called a Malama Tour, but it's basically where they come and they're able to, you know, learn about the land. They're able to, you know, do different work, whether it be agricultural, whether it be natural resource conservation, whether it be working in the mountains, working down in mullahs and down by the ocean. But I think the idea is that while they're there, it's not just, you know, come, you know, participate, pull weeds, you know, that type of thing. There's an educational value to it. And I think that by doing that and by coupling that with other experiences, particularly things like that sensory experience, we're able to basically have an education system that's not just in one ear and out the other. It's something that can sit with them and that they'll take back. I always kind of think back to being a kid, you know, that smell, right? You know, when you smell something, you immediately remember where you were at that time. And if we're able to have people come and have people learn and have people see what they're preserving and maybe feel like their dollars are going towards, excuse me, you know, their travel dollars, their visitor dollars are going towards something that perpetuates, that's not just basically a one and done and I'm, you know, bought my drink and I'm out the door, but something that might preserve, whether it be local food production, open space, general resource conservation. That's something that you can create not only an economic opportunity for private, state, federal land management in regards to how do you keep these resources the way that we as residents, you know that they should be kept, but it also creates an opportunity to basically share our story and have that visitor not only leave without feeling like they're not only leaving that way, but they're also able to then communicate and hopefully bring back, say, the next generation of visitors that has the same appreciation for what we're doing.
Thank you, Taylor. Appreciate your response. Kumu Hina, we would like to hear your thoughts. Do you think the state is doing a good job in terms of educating responsible visitors? And is there anything else we should be doing?
Mahalo. My answer is multifold. Is the state doing a good job? The state can only do so much in terms of its current capacity to educate. Some of those in the driver's seats and in the primary positions to do said teaching or said empowerment for our visitors are not necessarily equipped with the understandings that come from within the Kanaka community. When I say the Kanaka community, I mean the whole Native Hawaiian community. But that requires the Native Hawaiian community and other Kama'aina who would like to be a part of that and rightfully should. There has to be emphasis on the Kanaka in the community. Right now, the current model is based on the Kanaka community actually having a whole lot more than we have been empowered to have for a long time. So for example, in terms of wanting to hear authentic, real stories, the history, in terms of being able to access Hawaiians that actually speak Hawaiian and actually are about being it, if whether it's fishing or being in the taro patch or whatever it is, we actually have to have those things in place. And so to expound on what Taylor was saying, it's not just the visitor experience, but we also have to give some concerted effort towards what are the impacts upon Kanaka, because it rides much on Native Hawaiian elements of having this be a special place. I would like to think that there still is some of that sentiment, in addition to just the larger quote unquote island feeling. It is all based in the understanding of fundamentals and basic understandings that originate from Kanaka way of life. And right now, the Kanaka in my homeland are ailing, and there's mass exodus. Because why? We have been taught that living in Hawaii is not the ideal. We've been taught to seek a quote unquote better life away on the continent. We have been taught to embrace other things other than our own livelihood, because we've been ingrained upon by not only the larger system of politics and economics, but in our education system. We've not been empowered to see that the very things that make our life special is what should sustain us. And that is how I believe that we can actually create a better sense of equilibrium and a better sense of place, not only for the visitors who come to enrich and enhance their experiences, but to help improve the quality of life of the Kanaka and Kama'aina. If we don't do that, it's still, at its best, either a codependent or parasitic type of relationship. We need to strive for symbiosis in how we exchange with one another. But to close my thought out, that also puts an onus upon my own community to really take a good look at how are we going to approach this understanding of tourism, and how will we have a sense of ownership as well. So opportunities have to be created for us to literally own again that which is supposed to be Hawaii, and then we have to put it out in a way that keeps us feeling good. And as somebody who comes from the tourist industry, when I first graduated from high school, it helped to put money in my pocket, but it wasn't necessarily helping me in a larger scheme of trends that were occurring in the Hawaiian community, of which are many. We can't go into that now, but yes, we need to really have a much more comprehensive look at the different facets that contribute to the health and wellness of a tourism industry that is a symbiotic relationship.
Mahalo, Hina. You
Hello.
touched upon the livelihood of residents, and in relation to that, I want to move into the topic of jobs. And Jerry mentioned a very interesting stat yesterday about the amount of workers who are in the hospitality industry, and I'll let him share that figure with us in a minute. We all pretty much have a close friend or family member who has worked or is presently employed in the hospitality industry. And Jerry, could you kind of touch base on this more?
Yeah, sure can. And Kumu mentioned something very important. There has been an exodus over the last couple of years. I mean, not just people leaving the island to go to the mainland or wherever they're, or to Las Vegas or wherever, but we had a lot of retirements as well. When I look at Turtle Bay, for instance, we lost during the first year over 15 housekeepers. That doesn't sound like a lot, but if you multiply that, within all the hotels that we have, that's a lot. And it was these people were of the right age, of course, to retire. Many moved back, perhaps to the Philippines or other places. And they took their pensions and all the hard work over the years that they worked and decided to actually leave. And I get cards and letters from them, almost weekly, this to say hello and how's everything going. So that did happen, and Kumu's absolutely right. But there's if you take base year 2019, I use that year because of the last full year before COVID, we had about 200,000 people in the hospitality tourism business in Hawaii. And if you say that the modern nuclear family is 4, so you use the multiplier there, that's 800,000 people in Hawaii that just touch tourism, that actually have have someone in the household that actually works within tourism. Our population is about 1.4 million. So it's over half of the population that touches tourism. So that's really, I think, important. And our big challenge is not the wages that are paid in the hotels. Many of the hotels, as you know, and the viewing audience knows, are union jobs, and those hotels that aren't union mimic the wages and benefits of most of them of the hotels that are union. And so the jobs are very good. I mean, at many of the hotels that I'm responsible for, I don't think there's many bartenders that make less than $100,000 a year. Housekeepers in the 50s plus gratuities into the $60,000 bracket. So I mean, they're good paying jobs with pensions and health benefit, great health benefits, and on and on. I won't go into them all, but they are good jobs. The challenge we all have is to buy a house here in Hawaii. The median price is almost $1 million or more, as we've all read about. Hawaii's expensive. So I could go on and on about that, but I'll cut it short and just say, these jobs are very good jobs. They pay well, they have great benefits. We live in a very expensive place.
Ikaika, did you have anything to add?
Thanks, Kathy. Going back to a bit of what was discussed earlier, I do think it's imperative that we do everything possible to bring people together. I did see a question that popped up asking about the Maui County Council's moratorium on building permits. And I understand why a policy like that would be introduced as communities feel overrun. I do think, though, that it's possible to come to more of a middle ground, if you will, and perhaps restrict building permits for new resort areas and allow for redevelopment of an older product so that our product doesn't get overly dated and we can't compete. I also feel, and have for a long time, that all of our stakeholders, the 3 that I mentioned earlier, should refocus our efforts, and rather than trying to attract more visitors, shift to the model from before, where the state actually made more of an income from 7 to 8 million visitors than we do now with 10, because a lot of the visitors that we get today, unfortunately, are budget travelers. So it's really about also retooling the marketing to what type of visitor we are looking at. And this may not be a popular position, but I've had this position for some time as well. HTA's marketing budget, I've thought for some time, is too large. I absolutely get the Coca-Cola effect, that to maintain your status as the best product does take some marketing. I would agree with that. But I've heard from so many people across the state that bringing in 10 million visitors, and right now we're bringing in more, just isn't sustainable and is going to contribute to ruining the Hawaii that all of us have come to love, and ultimately too, for visitors that we'd like to bring in. So it is possible to balance, but I believe that we've got to do more as the three stakeholders in coming together and having those discussions. But as we showed in Windward Oahu, can be done.
Thank you, Ikaika. Hina, did you have anything to add?
Yes, mahalo. Going back to what Jerry was saying, it's no secret that within the Kanaka and Kama'aina communities, our island people, that we aren't always the ones that are driven to these service-oriented jobs. We're driven to other kinds of economic opportunities that often lay outside on the continental US or somewhere else. And so when you have transient migrant influx of people, and then they do what Jerry had articulated earlier, is after they reach their retirement age and then they go, it leaves us at an even greater loss, because then that job pool is not going to be filled by our own islander people yet again. And in terms of what Ikaika had said, to expound on that understanding, the quality of the visitor, and this is by no means in any way meant to shade upon a budget traveler. However, when we give in to the demands, the needs, and the whims of the budget traveler, it creates for a much different experience all the way around, you know, and we ourselves have to contemplate what kind of experiences do we want to cultivate, and do we want to cater to this even in how we conceptualize what we offer, you know. So yes, support to everything that's been said so far, and I really look forward to a different kind of tourism reality for us.
Thank you, Hina. One of our attendees, Zareen, made an interesting comment. She said, Hawaii is the #1 tourist destination right now, and we need to utilize this to our advantage. What are your thoughts about that?
I think attracting visitors is okay. I've never been an opponent of the industry per se, but again, I've also long held the belief that Hawaii needs to really examine and have a conversation amongst policymakers, the industry, and the community as to exactly what types of visitors that we want to bring in. 10 million, especially now more than 10 million, just isn't sustainable. So I would rather see a refocus. And really the question is, how do we refocus our product to the visitor who's going to come and spend additional dollars here? That's been really what has been talked about for some time, trying to find those visitors who are going to come here and spend more dollars. We also get asked by residents if we could preserve more of our special places on certain days for our residents. One idea that's been mentioned about 2 particular places in general, one Hanauma Bay and one Diamond Head, just happen to be 2 that folks have mentioned to me. Perhaps we allow for Kama'aina only on weekends, similar to what the Honolulu City Council started discussing with Windward Parks and beaches back in 2011, 2012, Kama'aina Sundays. Perhaps we look at Kama'aina weekends with Hanauma Bay and Diamond Head. We reserve just those 2 days for our Kama'aina, and then Monday through Friday, we open to everybody while most of our Kama'aina are at work. Again, as I've talked to people, folks have suggested that we look at policies like that so that our Kama'aina get to enjoy their home and also get to enjoy those special places that they pay for and have used for so long. And at the same time, it lessens the visitor traffic and keeps the place special for everybody.
Mahalo, Ikaika. Taylor, did you have any comments to add?
No, I think, you know, it is interesting because if you're going to be looking at I think there's no doubt that the type of traveler has changed since reopening from COVID. I think the biggest change we've seen at Kualoa is the lack of eastbound visitors. And I think that when you're looking at international visitors and different spending values and budget versus higher end, price points play a big part in that. And, you know, the reality is the direction and the situation that we're in as far as the amount of visitors that we attract and basically welcome to the islands is something that I think that how you change that is a very complicated type of thing. I formerly mentioned price point as being one way. That is something that is difficult though, while you know, trying to maintain something that you don't want to be hurting the bottom line of current scenario. However, that might require some of those difficult decisions, and how that looks, I'm not exactly sure. I think you know, a lot of very good things have been said, and I think really the big question, and I've seen some comments in the chat, is how do you get all the stakeholders to basically come to the table, discuss, and then agree upon those solutions? Because I think there are many alternatives to what our current state is, but however, you know, we got here over the course of decades. I don't think we're going to change it over the course of months. And so I think it's a matter of maybe looking at that infrastructure for the conversation to be had between those various stakeholders, and as Ikaika has mentioned many times, how to look at it both legislatively as well as economically, because I think if you don't have those two key factors, it's a pretty windy road.
And I see people asking if these types of Kama'aina weekend policies could be implemented on the neighbor islands. Absolutely could. But what I'm hoping we don't see is any branch of government, whether it be the state executive branch or the legislative branch at the state level, doing this from an Oahu-centric approach. I would like to approach your neighbor island elected officials, primarily your county council members, because really, for all counties, Honolulu included, I've just noted that those are the folks closest to you, that you see most often, and who are most often out in the community, just because of what your county council members, particularly the neighbor island folks, do and how they go about their work. So I'm hopeful that we would be able to start the discussion for the neighbor islands with the neighbor island elected officials and have it at the community level. The last thing I want to see is state government saying, okay, neighbor islands, this works on Oahu, so it's going to work for you too, and let me tell you how we're going to help you. This really has to be a process driven by neighbor islanders on the neighbor island communities. And I'm committed to working with neighbor island elected officials, primarily the county council members, to bring about those policies to ensure, one, that there are policies that are going to work on the neighbor islands, and just as importantly, that there are policies supported by the neighbor island people. That's why I cannot be Oahu-centric.
Hina, go ahead.
Mahalo. Following up to what Ikaika said, one of the reasons why I am supportive of Ikaika's efforts to put forward what I look forward to be is different approach to leadership in our community. I want our Hawaii to reflect that this is still Hawaii through the lens of Kanaka, through the lens of Hawaiian worldview and understanding. The questions asked about what kind of traveler do we want? We don't necessarily want to focus on one type of traveler. We want to have an understanding that there will be all kinds of travelers. However, just as much as we must pay attention to the travelers that come and their range of experiences that they get, but we must also really revamp what we instill within our own island people, how we empower our own island people to respond to the needs of not only the traveler industry, but self-sustainability. And if through self-sustainability and through the education system, we can shift the paradigm from where we have been for the last how many years and really change it to head towards that kind of reality where being quote unquote local or being quote unquote Kanaka or Kama'aina is not just something either that's dismissed or looked down upon, but really actually something that we our own selves can look to being even more self-reliant and putting ourselves more out there for leadership. So perhaps what I'm really saying is that our own Kanaka community and other Kama'aina need to also step ourselves up in not having the tourism industry drive us, either drive us to what we do or drive us out, but we need to drive it. And we need to take greater responsibility and greater accountability to assert ourselves more. Because all too often, people from outside experiences from beyond the shores of Hawaii come with various models, and not to be condescending to any of those models, but they don't necessarily serve our island communities in the way that they should, so that it's a better cycle and a better relationship between all parties. Mahalo.
Mahalo, Hina. Follow-up question to what you were saying. Do you feel that the locals, the residents, and particularly Kanaka, are they benefiting from what's happening? And is there more we can be doing?
We see some trends, but those trends are influenced by other efforts, and they come rather independent aside from the tourism industry. And I must say, I'm going to be a bit critical upon our current governmental leadership. And we've seen leadership that some have been kind towards Hawaiian community interests, concerns, needs, but many others have perhaps not so much said so, but by way of action, treated us as an inconvenient nuisance, if you would. And yes, I said it. It's an inconvenient nuisance when the Hawaiian community raises concerns about something or speaks. Now, granted, there's always ways to speak so that everyone will listen. But oftentimes when we raise our voice about things, if it's not convenient or if it's not to the benefit of those who are in the economic and political driver's seat, it doesn't always get heard. And often we are either dismissed or set aside and try to be pacified, but not necessarily really contributed to, so that we ourselves can help to create a different paradigm and a different shift for Hawaii. The reason why I'm here is because I am interested in contributing to this shift. And if by participating in discussions like this, it creates more discussion and more opportunity for us to act in different ways, then I'm all for it.
Thank you for sharing your manao with us, Hina. We had a question from Ernest, and maybe Jerry could jump in and take this question for us. He said, perhaps if we are able to reduce the number of vacation rental units that are spread out throughout our residential communities and create a complete resort experience with higher level of services and amenities, we might be able to bring in higher paying visitors to these hotels and resorts, thus reducing the negative impact on the lifestyle of our local residents. What are your thoughts, Jerry?
I think, Kathy, the Ernie is spot on. I think that we need to put as much as we can the genie back in the bottle and look at our tourism zones. And they are called tourism zones for a reason, and they're on each island. And if you look at Waikiki, or if you look at Lahaina, Kaanapali, the Kona Coast, all those areas were designed basically for tourism, and they contribute a lot to our economies. And there isn't many residents that want to enjoy a different family or a different group every week in the house of their neighbor next door. So I think Ernest is right. We can do a much better job than we're currently doing. And we've had kind of a blind eye towards short-term rentals. Legal ones, they are legal, they're paying taxes. There really isn't that many on 3 of the islands that are legal. I mean, on the island of Maui, there's 5,982 that are legal, which is an outlier. On Oahu, there's about 820 outside the zones that are legal. So I think just by doing this and kind of taking care of that situation, putting, having the tourists be in the tourist zones where they really should be. If you're paying $400 or $500 a night, you're going to be enjoying the beach in front of the hotel, the fitness center, the restaurants that they have, maybe a spa, and you're going to enjoy the resort more than being on the roads and being out and going to to our residents' favorite fishing spot, that kind of thing. However, if you wake up in the morning and you're in a short-term rental, you don't have those amenities. So you drive to Costco, or you drive to breakfast, or to lunch, or to dinner, or to your activities. So I think Ernest is spot on by what he's saying. I think we can do a much better job using the tourism zones better in taking care of this challenge that we have throughout the islands. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Jerry. As we talked about short-term rentals, they're a hot button issue, and they're actually going to be up for discussion tomorrow at the Honolulu City Council. Ikaika, as a former City Council chair, can you share some of your insight on this and how we can navigate this ongoing issue with 2 different sides?
I've always been of the opinion that there is room for a limited number of short-term rentals. That's always been my position from the time I first started in city government back in 2003. By limited, what I mean is I've always supported hosted short-term rentals where the owner occupant of the home lives on site. And there's a very easy litmus test to prove homeowner occupancy. That is your homeowner's exemption on your property taxes. You can own 50 homes, hell, you can own 5,000 homes on Oahu, but you only get 1 homeowner's exemption in the home that you live in. So that's first and foremost. Additionally, when Bill 89 was discussed in 2020, when I was chair of the Honolulu City Council, I was willing to entertain and ask my colleagues to consider if standalone short-term rentals, a limited number of them, should be permitted. And my litmus test for that, to keep it limited, was that in order for someone to operate a short-term rental where there was no homeowner occupant, the operator had to show a homeowner's exemption somewhere on Oahu, thus proving that they live on Oahu. Additionally, your homeowner's exemption would grant you 1 permit for a standalone short-term rental. So again, you could own 5,000 homes on Oahu. You are only going to be permitted 1 short-term rental. That automatically eliminates anyone who doesn't live on Oahu. And you can't even be a neighbor islander. Anybody who doesn't live on Oahu would be removed from the equation right off the bat. So many of those, or all of those offshore operated and owned entities would be gone immediately, which would eliminate much of the problem of the non-responsive owners and the disrespectful ones. Would also eliminate the sheer number of short-term rentals. So I thought that that middle ground approach was reasonable, if you will, to start the discussion. My colleagues on the Honolulu City Council didn't agree at the time, but I'm hopeful that that's a discussion that we can at least have. I've always believed that there is a middle ground approach where no group would walk away feeling that they got nothing, and that we could offer this middle ground approach so that everyone in the community would be willing and able to walk away feeling that something positive for them was achieved, while at the same time getting rid of the most awful and disrespectful owners by simply removing them from the equation right off the bat. Don't live here, can't even apply for a permit.
Those are very interesting suggestions that you made, Ikaika. Thank you for sharing. Do any of the other panelists have anything to add or respond?
Yes, I'd like to add that, for anybody who might hear things, like Ikaika said, to come up with things that would say if you are not a resident, then you just can't. Unless we really do something that is a bit more emphasized, a bit more pronounced, to be polite about it, we're not going to fully see the benefit of anything that's to be implemented. Why? Because Hawaii is far too entrenched in a downward slope, and it's almost like watching the plane crash, and you're going to hit. And when that hits, that's beyond repair for Hawaiian community and other island people. So my point of contributing to this moment right here is to say that we can't be afraid of some of the change that we will need to make. And we need to consider just how serious a kind of change that we will need. And it is not, the onus is not to be placed solely upon tourism. The intricacy of the web is so much like this that if you think of this as something that's grown upon us, and you try to remove one part here, it's like taking the crust off the skin, off of a abrasion. You remove that old skin, but you're also removing healed skin and good skin. And so in order to avoid something like that, we really have to think of just how fleshed out the factors become, in terms of what drives rental rates and home ownership rates, what drives it up. I could think of a few examples, probably much greater than we have time for. What is it that keeps fueling this exodus of our own people out, which creates that balance, that imbalance that is offset by everybody coming in? And that results in even more change. And the perceptivity of that change is reflected in even less and less people wanting to be a part of this tourism equation here. It's like taking juice and filling water and watching the juice run out. And before you know it, you have replaced that juice with water if you keep pouring it in. So with that said, again, we need a much more serious and much more comprehensive look at all of the factors that contribute to life in Hawaii, and a greater kind of complementary relationship between all places. And again, I do not place only emphasis on tourism, but I place a whole lot of emphasis and onus upon my own Kanaka community to have serious discussions about this. Otherwise, might as well say aloha to all the Hawaiians. All the Hawaiians go live on the continent somewhere. Let all the foreigners come in, call the shots, and replace us Hawaiians as the face of Hawaii to the public, and we would have been responsible for our own undoing.
Thank you for sharing your manao with us. I think we're kind of reaching the hour mark now, so I do want to have one last question that the panelists can discuss. We've heard multiple perspectives tonight, and some of the major issues that lie within our community, of which include preserving the integrity of our communities, protecting our natural resources, such as our beaches and parks, and educating our visitors about how special of a place Hawaii is. How can government step in and take action to shape responsible policy?
Government stepping in to shape more responsible policy really starts by having a discussion with our residents. I see one question that came in regarding the Kona Coast being taken over by visitors. It's a position of one of our guests, and asking how residents can have more say. Really, it's by starting that conversation. When I was on Hawaii Island recently, I had a number of fishermen share with me that exact position. the concern amongst these fishermen, and these fishermen are Kama'aina folks, regardless of their ethnicity. They live in Hawaii, they pay taxes in Hawaii. So they're residents, they're part of us. They're Kama'aina like those of us on this panel are.
Mhm.
And they're concerned that, from what they tell me, they can't even go down to their shorelines and practice fishing anymore without proper permits. That kind of policy is simply pilau. But that's the kind of policy you're going to get when government doesn't come to people and have a real conversation as to exactly what types of policies to have, what the implications of the policies will have, and what the community desires to see. I can understand the community being concerned about overfishing, about under-regulation to an extent where people may be taking too much fish. But to simply say in this particular instance, to be able to fish, you need to go to government and get these different types of approvals. We're going to see more of that until the community is really engaged with. And again, I've got to go back to the discussions that were had with the Honolulu City Council in Windward, Oahu back in 2011, 2012. These were extensive community meetings, sometimes very uncomfortable meetings. But oftentimes you've got to have an uncomfortable discussion as a family to reach consensus and to find a policy that's going to work. Cannot help but to have uncomfortable discussions at times. But that's really the only way that you're going to make any progress. And those discussions start amongst the community with the policymakers. Again, I would argue your county council members, especially at the neighbor island level, talk with those folks, see what the community wants, what will work. Then we engage the state legislature from there and the state administration so that we're crafting policies that the community supports, the community just as importantly understands, and that will be effective. Rather than coming from a top-down approach by state government, which also largely results in Oahu-centric policies. Those just don't work every place. They don't.
Thank you. So we are reaching the end of our hour. Thank you everyone for attending our first session of MUA Hawai'i. We are so excited about the turnout that we had tonight, and just a friendly reminder that we will be continuing this for the next 4 weeks. And so you have a lot to look forward to. We'll be sending out the email invites via ikaikaanderson.com. I also want to give a warm mahalo to our panelists tonight for sharing their manao with us. We heard some very insightful thoughts from Taylor, Jerry, Ikaika, and Kumu Hina. And I think what the biggest takeaway that I got is that all of us need to work together and come together to shape responsible policy to maintain the uniqueness of Hawaii and keep it special, but it involves multiple groups and people.
Would also like to ask folks, if I may, just very quickly, I know we couldn't get to everybody's questions, but if folks could email us with any questions that you have, if you'd like us to reach back to you, we'll do our best to get back to everyone that way. Our email address, ikaika@ikaikaanderson.com. We also have a phone number. When we can, we do answer it. Otherwise, it does go to voicemail, and I return those calls along with staff. That phone number is 808-259-2022. And we will do our best to get back with everybody. But really appreciate everybody being here this evening and sharing your manao and giving us the opportunity to talk story with you. Can't thank you enough. Mahalo.
Thank you.
Mahalo.